Welcome to the Global News podcast here on YouTube, where we go behind the headlines to find out more about a story and why it matters. Today, what next for Iran? Well, the government in Tehran say the anti-government protests in which hundreds of people are thought to have been killed are now under total control. President Trump had threatened military action if the Iranian regime killed protesters. Now he says the leadership in Tehran wants to negotiate. Well, I'm joined by the BBC's international editor, Jeremy Bowen. Welcome, Jeremy. And tell us, President Trump says he wants to negotiate with Tehran. Do we know what's happening behind the scenes?
Well, no, we don't really. And the question is, what are they going to negotiate about? Because earlier rounds of negotiations going back into the Biden administration, and before that, of course, in the era of Obama, were about Iran's nuclear program. Now, while there's plenty to discuss with all of that, that's not why people have been on the streets of Tehran and big cities and smaller towns right across Iran. This is a protest which has been started off because of economic woes, and it's morphed into something rather bigger. However, it could be that Trump wants to come away with something that he can say, look, this is what my pressure on the Iranians has gleaned, and that is a new round of talks. Having said that, if they did actually sit down to talk again about the nuclear issues, it would be immensely difficult because all the rounds of talks, for example, that the Biden administration had, in the end came to nothing.
How key is the relationship with the United States and particularly with this president?
Well, Trump is a transactional guy. He likes to show results. He likes to say, yeah, we made a deal. So if some kind, and I suspect, therefore, that the Iranian offer of talks is they're pretty clever, the Iranians, actually, and they probably think, well, this is a way of getting him to ease up on the military threats, maybe put more pressure on Israel not to take action against us as well, because he thinks he might be able to get a diplomatic process going that might lead to some kind of a deal. And even if they don't really think in real life it would lead to some kind of a deal, a process like that is a way of keeping him off their backs.
So what are President Trump's options? We're not just talking about military strikes, are we?
Well, no, not just military. There's other things they can do if they want to attack the regime. They can use cyber. They can try and disrupt their communications. Big countries like America don't often talk about their cyber capabilities, but President Trump couldn't resist a bit of a boast when, it was only about a week ago now, just over a week, when they kidnapped the president of Venezuela, and he said that we cut all the streetlights because that's a capacity we can do. We put Caracas into darkness, so they could do something like that. I do think that it is very hard to see how you help a street protest against an authoritarian government by bombing that government, because of course, throughout the history of aerial warfare, when populations and cities have been bombed, it very often creates a nationalist backlash.
There had been speculation that these demonstrations would mean the beginning of the end of the regime. I mean, what effect do you think they'll have?
I think it's clearly the regime has been weakened particularly in the last year. They've lost allies in the region through Israeli military action. They've had a severe bombing campaign in that 12-day war back in the summer, with the Americans joining in with the Israelis. However, I think those people who want the end of the regime are going to be disappointed. The street protests don't have necessarily a coherent movement behind them. That's one thing. Second of all, killing people on the streets, and the regime in Tehran has shown repeatedly it's prepared to do that, is actually a very good way to stop them going into the streets and protesting, because people get scared, and you cannot blame them for that. If they think they're going to get shot dead, well, would you stay at home?
Hundreds have been.
Yeah, and hundreds have been. And the other thing would be to look for is, have cracks appeared within the government, the different branches of government there? Well, there are always factions. They disagree about things like the degree to which they should speak to the West, speak to the Americans, the degree to which they should be concerned about the outside world or go their own way. But I think the thing that that knits them together is their concern and their desire to keep the system of the Islamic Republic going. And they're all within that consensus. And right now, if you like, the network of coercion and repression that the Iranian regime has internally, well, they appear to be obeying orders. Their security guys have been opening fire on the streets at civilian protesters. The government there says that, in fact, they've been attacked too, and they have had to bury members of the security forces, so that seems to have been happening. But the Basij militia, the IRGC, the uniformed guys, they seem to be not split, loyal, and following orders, and that is very important in terms of the Islamic regime in Tehran keeping its grip on the country.
But do you think the Ayatollah's grip is weakening because there were protests in 2022 as well as these most recent ones?
Yeah, and protests before that. I mean, I was in Iran in 2009 when there were big protests after a disputed set of elections. And then I was there too while they were being cracked down on. And in the end, these big shows of force by security forces, men with clubs, men with weapons, automatic weapons, these sort of posses of motorcycle cops and militia guys going around the city like sort of flying pickets to break up demonstrations. All that was going on too. So yeah, I think undoubtedly the regime has been weakened. The supreme leader is an old man. He's in his late 80s, and he's not going to be there forever, clearly. So there's been for some years talk about what the succession would be. I think these reports which have been flying about of him, preparing to flee to Moscow and so on, I think there's no evidence whatsoever for anything like that. But yeah, the regime is weak. Every time there's a big upsurge of disagreement, dissent, and answered by killing, it does leave the regime weaker. There's no doubt about it. But essentially, the real weakness, the big problem they face is economic right now, because it's a combination. That's why these demos started. It's a combination of economic mismanagement, corruption, and the really damaging impact of sanctions.
What about the impact on the Middle East? Because Iran is tremendously powerful in the region.
Yeah, well, they've lost quite a bit of that power because of the attacks that Israel has made on their various allies in Lebanon, in Yemen. They've lost the Assad regime in Syria, who were a very important part of their network just over a year ago. So that undoubtedly has absolutely unhinged their whole security strategy for the region. But Iran is a country which believes it has a legitimate role to play. It wasn't colonized. It's been independent for millennia. It's been has a very strong sense of itself. Has a population, I think, of getting on for 90 million people. It's a big country with a lot of natural resources. So they will always be a factor in the region. But certainly at the moment, the Islamic regime is threatened, no doubt, by these protests. But I think that they still have the capacity and the desire to hang on to power.
Thanks, Jeremy. And that was Jeremy Bowen, the BBC's international editor. And you can find out more on the Global News Podcast. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. And if you particularly liked this episode, please subscribe to us here on YouTube. And if there are other stories you want us to cover, please tell us in the comments below. But that's it for this edition. Thanks for watching and listening to us here on YouTube.